Alrighty, y'all. So on my tie today is, of course, a picture, one of the most famous pictures one you should recognize of the Boston Massacre, right? The Boston Massacre of March 5th. Now, if you guys remember, there had been violence against stamp collectors. We saw tarring and feathering yesterday. They even sacked a couple people's homes and things like that. So the king decides that he needs to send troops to Boston to control. We mentioned that there was only 16,000 Bostonians, and then they added 4,000 soldiers. And how you guys would feel if you had one out of every five students roaming around. Of course, it might stop some of the fights or not. I don't know. But anyway, so what ends up happening here is, so the British send troops in 1768. So the British action here, and I don't know what's up with all that stuff. But anyway, so we come to the Boston Massacre of 1770, right? This is incredibly important, but most Americans don't understand it, okay? They don't understand what happened. Now, up north, y'all, there's this weird phenomenon. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it, but it's called, I believe, snow. Frozen precipitation. And, we get it here and it's kind of cute and all that. We make little, snowmen about that tall or whatever. But when they get it up there, it can get thick. And it can be on the ground even in March. And by March, it's freezing, it's melting, it's freezing. It gets mixed up with all the dirt and stuff on there. And I don't know if you've ever been hit with, I know you guys probably throw snowballs. Have y'all ever thrown like the ice balls? They are painful. I got hit with one in the face in Canada. It actually broke the skin as a kid. And so they can be pretty serious. Now, that's going to be part of the story coming up here later. Now, I'm going to go through the events, and then I have some incredible, rare historical footage for you guys to see of it, early GoPro footage of the Boston Massacre. Now, so how did it kind of go down? A quick summary, and then you guys can see it. What happened was there was a British officer, a British soldier, enlisted soldier, and he was given the job of guarding the custom house. That's where they collect taxes. And so he was just one dude with his brown Betsy, or whatever they called their gun, their big gun that they had, their rifle. Now remember, those rifles, y'all, are not a rifle, it's a musket. You fire once, and then what do you have to do? You have to reload it, pour the powder in, put the bullet in, ram it in, put a little bit of powder or a cap on your musket. It takes about 30 seconds if you're really, really fast. So a guy comes up and starts insulting him, right? And arguing with him, all this kind of stuff. Eventually, the British soldiers had enough, hits him with a rifle butt, okay? He goes down, he yells. Now, there have been a bunch of people hanging out in the taverns, getting their drink on and everything, and they then gather, and they begin to harass the one dude, okay? He calls out the main guard. Now, it's a very different world than today. If you and I yelled, people wouldn't hear us blocks away, right? Because we all have our TVs on, we got our music on, we got loud cars and airplanes. In those days, you could actually hear that. And so what happens, y'all, they've been throwing snowballs, they've been throwing rocks at this guy, and eventually Captain Preston brings around about 7 or so soldiers. They form kind of a thing. Now, he wants to get out of there, but the Americans have kind of cut off his exit. So it's a really delicate situation. And I got to say, y'all, our colonists weren't too bright because some of them start taunting the British. Now, important safety tip. Do not ever yell fire at somebody pointing a gun at you. It may seem like common sense, but these still were people yelling fire. And guess what? Somebody will fire. Now, what we think happened is one of the guys got knocked down. And he'd been one of them who'd applied for a job down at the docks and had gotten beat up because they didn't like the competition. So what happens is he gets knocked down. What I heard, he looked at the dude who beat him up at the dock the other day, and it was just too tempting, y'all. Busted a cap on him right there, literally, because they put caps on their things to fire. And that guy goes down. And I don't know if you've ever been in a massacre, but every massacre I've been in, once one person starts shooting, guess what? Everybody has to start shooting, okay? Now, what's interesting is there was, I think, only 7 shots fired, but 11 people got wounded. What do you think happened? Bullets maybe went right through people. Maybe there were ricochets. There's even the belief that maybe 2 bullets might have been put in the guns. So when they fired them, you got to remember these muskets aren't like rifles. They're not super accurate. They're kind of like spit wad shooters. The bullets just go like that when they come out. So it's possible that might have happened. But some of the wounds are just absolutely awful, okay? So I do happen to have rare historical footage here for y'all. Can someone hit the lights back there?
A sentry, Private Hugh White, was guarding the customs house located here.
Rare historical footage. Now, this is filmed actually on
Around
site.
8 p.m., a young apprentice, Edward Garrick, began to taunt White. The taunting continued until White struck Garrick with the butt of his musket. Garrick fell to the ground.
Down goes Garrick. Down goes Garrick.
Word of the incident swept through the town. A swarm of angry citizens descended on the square. Many of them had been drinking in the local
Christmas addicts in
taverns.
front, right?
The angry crowd surrounded the sentry and threatened him with bodily harm. While the entire town appeared to be erupting, Captain Thomas Preston was in the main
You might be able to
barracks,
shoot one, but after
the
that
street
it's over.
from the old state house, close enough to hear Sentry White call
75
for help.
yards away.
Captain Preston marched in with a small group of 6 privates and a corporal. The British rescue team reached White and attempted to escort him back to the barracks, but they were stopped by a mob of 200 to 300 angry citizens.
Wow.
Hemmed in
No,
by the
do
crowd,
not leave. Don't leave. You're not
Preston
gonna let them
ordered his troops into a semicircle formation and took a position in front of his men. Several people in the crowd dared the soldiers to shoot, yelling, "Fire!" over and over.
Not a good idea.
It made the British soldiers feel like they didn't have any courage. You know, they're wanting to fire. They're wanting to answer that
Like
call,
it last
but
week.
they can't. And the crowd knows they can't, so they're daring them.
The ugly demonstration turned lethal when Patriot Richard Palm struck one of the soldiers, Private Hugh Montgomery, with a stick.
Yep.
Montgomery fell to the ground, then rose up and fired. Moments later, the Boston Massacre began. The other soldiers let loose with a fusillade of musket fire. 11 of the colonials fell.
Once they had fired, the mob retreated. So the soldiers reloaded their weapons, and as the mob had come back in to retrieve their wounded, the soldiers thought that the mob was advancing on them to do them harm. They leveled their muskets at the crowd as if to fire again. When Preston saw it, he immediately knocked up their muzzles, yelling, "Don't fire, stop, don't fire." Preston ordered the men into a column of 2s and then marched them back to the main guard.
Paul Revere, Samuel Adams, and other Patriot leaders quickly turned the violent confrontation into a massacre, a symbol of British tyranny, and demanded justice. Captain Preston claimed that the shootings had been a tragic accident, but it was to no avail. On March 13th, Preston and 6 of the 8 enlisted men were indicted for murder. The lawyer who defended the British soldiers was John Adams, ironically, the same man who would become America's second president.
And lead us into independence.
The trial hinged on one essential question. Had the British soldiers acted in self-defense, or did they commit murder?
All right, so what do y'all think? Should they be found guilty? Did they kill people, like, just cold-bloodedly, Dahmer style? What do you think? No, I mean, but they fired. I mean, who would you pick anybody particularly to go after? What about the captain? Did he do anything wrong? Did he order them to fire? He actually stopped them from firing on the second time. What about the first guy who fired? His self-defense. He got knocked down, right? The others, I don't know why they chose to fire. We do actually have trial testimony because it was a big trial. And the man who defended them, of course, obviously, was none other than John Adams here, right? Actual life size. our diets have made us the big people we are today. But anyway, so there's John Adams, right? Now, Adams, I've read different things. I've read that he was ordered to defend him. I've also read that he wanted to defend him. He wanted to prove to them, y'all, that Americans could give a fair trial, that even though there were passions going up. In fact, y'all, there was a lynch mob. We didn't use the word lynch in those days yet, but there was a lynch mob of people that formed around where these men were kept in their quarters. They wanted to go drag them out and kill them. Fortunately, that didn't happen. Can you imagine the ramifications of that? Instead, they had a very fair trial. Now, anybody know what happened in the trial? Were they found guilty? No. Two were, but not of murder. They were found guilty of manslaughter. What's the difference between manslaughter and murder? Murder is like what? On purpose, right? Murder is, it's a malice of forethought. Have you ever heard that term, malice of forethought? Be a good name for a band. I got to write that one down. But malice of forethought is, hey, what are you going to do today? Well, I'm planning on killing some colonials. You're thinking about it in advance. You go in intentionally doing it. Manslaughter is you do something stupid and your stupid action leads to somebody getting killed. Now, two of them were found guilty. I don't know how they figured it out. I can't remember if it was Hugh Montgomery or not. But they took their thumb and they had this small little thing that they heated in the stove, and then they burned an M on their thumbs. Why do you think they did that? Well, so for the rest of their life, anytime somebody shook their hands, anytime they had to write something, people were like, hey, dude, what'd you got the M for? Oh, I killed some colonists. It was a type of punishment back then. And so for the rest of their lives, these men wore an M there. Now, the first person traditionally believed to have fallen was Crispus Attucks. He was half African-American, right, and half Indian. We think Wampanoag, Indians, the same ones that met the Pilgrims and stuff. The question is, was he a free man or was he an escaped slave? We don't know. There's a lot that we don't know about him, but he is, as you guys know, probably the most remembered. Most people can't name the other victims who were there. Even I have to kind of refresh my memory all the time. So he is seen as the first person to die for liberty. And if you guys have to write an essay about, different groups in the American Revolution, you would definitely want to mention Attucks. In fact, the first person or among the first persons to fall in the American Revolution was an African-American by the name of Crispus Attucks. We even have a school in Houston named after him, okay? Now, so it was pretty nasty. All right, so we're going to go on and, take you guys past that. So what happens as a result of this? Well, two Boston Sons of Liberty decide that they're going to use this for propaganda. And indeed, y'all, this is a classic example of propaganda. Now, people think propaganda means it's completely false. Completely false propaganda does not do very well, y'all. You have to have an essence of truth. You have to have a certain core of truth, and then you go crazy and twist it for your own political things. Did British soldiers kill Americans? Yeah, it happened, okay? But they're going to take it to a whole nother level in this classic example of propaganda, where you twist events for propaganda purposes. You're trying to influence opinion. There's like a whole museum of propaganda I think I went to in Florida once. But anyway, y'all, so Sam Adams, remember, the leader of the Sons of Liberty, he gets with Paul Revere. And he tells Paul Revere, hey, I want you to make a picture of the Boston Massacre. Paul Revere's like, dude, man, I wasn't even there. And he's like, don't worry. I'll tell you what to put on it. Now, that's the way I traditionally had been taught it. Now, this year in Academic Decathlon, one of our pieces is the Boston Massacre. And I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. And I learned quite a bit about the picture. According to the Decathlon people, Paul Revere actually he plagiarized somebody else's picture. He just added a couple things on it. And the poor guy who originally did it, he didn't get any money. He got mad at Revere because Revere said, hey, can I borrow your picture there? I want to maybe do an engraving with it. He didn't think the dude would copy it completely, but apparently the guy did, and the guys didn't get any money or anything like that. Now, this picture will be called the Bloody Massacre. It will be engraved, which means they can print it and they can send it over the whole colony. They didn't have, I mean, it's just like today. If some outrage happened in America, somebody being beaten to death by a cop or something like that, or some terrible shooting, it would be sent to you and me on our phone. And man, our blood would get boiling. They didn't have phones, obviously, so instead they sent the picture to people. And of course, it's a very distorted picture. And people really got angry, okay? Like, have you read the actual story? No, but I've seen Paul Revere's drawing. And so they send prints to everybody. Now, we're going to look at the drawing, and they're going to tell you some things that are wrong about it from that same documentary. So here we go.
Most Americans, everything we know about the Boston Massacre is derived from this engraving. It was created by the famous patriot Paul Revere 5 years before his legendary midnight ride. The widely circulated picture depicts a small group of unarmed civilians being cut down by a volley of musket fire. This picture has been reprinted in countless history books and pamphlets and has been the defining image of the incident for over 200 years. But almost everything about this engraving is wrong. The shootings took place at night, not daytime. There was a thick layer of snow and ice on the ground, and the colonists were not the passive victims depicted in the engraving. There was a total of 9 British soldiers at the scene that night, not 8. And most importantly, the picture depicts the British Captain Preston standing behind his men.
What does it look like he's doing?
Here, Revere
he's ordering the firing, right?
British bias.
The witnesses, first of all, placed Preston in front of the soldiers to begin with. The soldiers are lined up very neatly as if they're firing in formation
like
and as if they're being given a signal to fire by the commanding officer. This contradicts the witness testimony. This makes it look like a massacre.
We have very little information about the victims of this so-called massacre, but there is one person depicted in the engraving who has achieved a measure of fame, Crispus Attucks.
Crispus Attucks is probably the most well-remembered name from the Boston Massacre. He was popularly touted as the first Black American to die for the cause of freedom.
Attucks has gone down in history as the first victim to fall to the British guns, shot at point-blank range as he stood in front of the crowd. But is this what really happened? Even though he was immortalized as the most famous martyr of the Boston Massacre, we actually know very little about Crispus Attucks. Was he a hero or a propaganda invention?
Now, to me, that isn't that important. It's more what people believe is more important. They get into this whole thing about whether he was the first to fall or not. To me, he fell, he died, and that's the big, big thing. And all these guys are important. Now, let's see here. So the Boston lawyer, John Adams, defended him. I'm going to go through the picture with y'all in more detail. He wanted to prove to the British that, like I said, that we would give them a fair trial. And this is going to be particularly galling when later, y'all, the British pass what's called the Administration of Justice Act, and they make us send British soldiers back overseas or British officials anytime they get in trouble. And like I said, they convicted 2 of them of manslaughter, and they let them go. All right? Now, here is the engraving by Paul Revere, okay, or at least Paul Revere is giving credit. I guess you could say it's kind of revered in history. Okay. Sorry. And I've got my usual 25,000 close-ups of it there. Now they say, oh, look, it wasn't done at night. There's no snow on the ground. Okay, I'll give them that. I don't see any snow on the ground. Why didn't they put the snow on the ground? What might that allude people to or make people start thinking? What might it remind them that had happened? Snowballs, right? So no snowballs, no weapons to use against the British. It looks like these Americans are just standing around, minding their own business, and somebody starts shooting them. Don't you hate when that happens? Now, they say it's not nighttime. But what is that, a UFO or something? What is that? That's the moon. To me, he's saying it's nighttime. If he does it all dark, it's going to be kind of hard to see stuff, right? And so to me, I think that's a weak argument that person made. But there are a lot of errors. Now, one thing Revere did add that wasn't on the original is he put a name on this building. He called it the Butcher's Hall. And as far as I know, there really wasn't a butcher there. What's he doing by doing that? He's making you think of what? Butchery, British butchering them. You know, it's kind of an early subliminal message. Oh, Butcher Hall. That's probably where the British were staying, coming out to do the killing. Okay, so let's look at some of this because I've studied this thing a lot over the years. Now, I don't know if Revere wrote it, and you do not write this down, but I do want to do a dramatic reading of. Hello? Hello? Okay, Ariana Rivera needs to go to attendance. Okay, thank you. All right, Ariana. Go to attendance. All right, need to talk to you. Take it, yeah, just in case. Just don't be gone long in case anybody else has an issue. All right, so at the bottom of the thing here, Revere, somebody else writes a poem. And I really should have written it in poem form, but I love this. It goes, unhappy Boston, see thy sons deploy, hallowed watts besmeared with guiltless gore, while Faithless and his savage bands with murderous rancor stretch their bloody hands like fierce barbarians grinning o'er their prey, approve the carnage and enjoy the day. If scalding drops from rage and anguish wrung, if speechless sorrows laboring for a tongue, or if the weeping world can aught appease, the plaintive ghost of victims such as these. Man, I need to make this into a rap. The patriots' copious tears for each are shed, a glorious tribute which embalms the dead. But no, fate summons to that awful goal, where justice strips the murderer and his soul. Should the venal, and I don't want to imagine what C-blank-T-S means, but it's a curse word, the scandal of the land, snatch the relentless villain from her hand. Keen execrations on this plate inscribed shall reach a judge who can never be bribed. Remember how we bribed a lot of their officials? And they figured the British would bribe our official and let these guys go. And of course, this happened before the trial. And then they list the names, Sam Maverick, James Caldwell, Crispus Attucks, and I forget the first guy's name, Gray. So anyway, here is your picture, y'all, that shows you the moon, okay, the buildings, in the background as well. And of course, there's the Butcher's Hall that wasn't really there. And then here's the firing squad as such. Check out the looks on some of the British soldiers. What does it look like some of them are doing, y'all? They're grinning like, I've always wanted to do this. Always wanted to do this. This is so awesome. And like this dude over here, he's like, I want to lean forward because I want my bullet to get there first. You know, he is just excited as could be. That's probably the dude that got knocked down and fired the first shot. I don't know. And definitely Preston here looks like he's ordering them to fire as if in a firing squad, right? Now, here are the innocent victims. And, they're just kind of standing around getting shot. I don't see any snowballs or stones or anything like that. Like, this guy's kind of like, hey, stop it. And then check out the lady here, like, oh, the humanity, almost as if she's prayed. Some people have compared her to sort of a Mary figure, like in the Christian church, like, standing there that way. Lots of blood. People, even then, y'all, liked blood. And some of it's actually fairly accurate. One dude was shot in the head, and it did blow a hole big enough you could put your whole fist into the back where his head had been. Then you had a dude shot here, and it's just like kind of like a little fountain of blood coming out. But it's pouring all there. It looks like they're taking away a guy that might be Crispus Attucks there that they're carrying away. Not exactly sure. But, of course, you see that in it. Now, you guys haven't mentioned yet the one thing that almost all students pick up on. There's also what? Not a cat. Dog. A dog, but close, right? It's a dog. Everybody's like, Mr. D, there's a doggy in the picture. Hey, what is that little doggy doing in my massacre? Well, the dog, y'all, there was reports that a dog showed up, and you know dogs, y'all, they'll lick anything. And the dog started licking up the blood. So they don't have it doing it, but it's like, hey, isn't that the dog that, yeah, it is. The dog that, yeah. And so that's in there to kind of remind everybody that a dog did it. And here's just another picture of the firing squad. And you see them and more of a close-up kind of some of the victims. Here's 1, 2, 3. There's at least 3 that look like they've been shot. There might be more. Okay. Oh, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, looks like this. Oh, is this one over here? Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe that's the 4 because 4 initially die, but I think 1 dies of his wounds. So we say he was mortally wounded or fatally wounded, and even more of a close-up. I could probably find a better copy and do that. Ooh, that came out awful. Pixelation like crazy. Now, it wasn't just this picture, which was great for people who couldn't read or write, but they wrote yards and yards of newspaper material. Now, you and I today, we want the news. We read it on our phone. We watch it on TV or whatever, right? These people were a lot more patient readers than we were. If you and I had a story this long, you and I aren't like that. If I start reading the internet story and it goes on for more than a couple minutes, I'm like, scroll, scroll, scroll. We're not very patient. These people didn't have any other source of information as far as news this way. And so it went through. Now, I did a project on this a few years ago, and I found some interesting stuff. Here we see one of the newspaper accounts last Thursday. Now, remember, in their printing, y'all, if you guys ever see F's in their printing, it's an S. If it looks like that, it's like a long S. I don't know why they did that, but I always have fun with that. And I go, oh, Boston, kind of thing. But last Thursday, agreeable to a general request of the inhabitants, by the consent of the parents and friends, were carried to their grave in succession. The bodies of Samuel Gray, Samuel Maverick, James Caldwell, and Crispus Attucks, the unhappy victims who fell in the bloody massacre of the Monday evening proceeding, ! And they go through and they describe the town's shops were closed. There was the church bells ringing, and it talks about them, bringing this all through and families following through and friends and all of that kind of stuff. Pretty strong stuff. Now, what I love is the picture of the dead. Now, of course, when you look at this, if there's somebody who couldn't read or read well, this was sort of like a quick message. Obviously, these are the coffins. And coffins in those days, y'all, the British still do it this way. They're made to fit your body, okay? They're not the big kind of rectangular boxes we have in this country. So they're kind of interesting that way. What do you think these letters are? Their names, their initials, right? SG, SM, JC, CA. Remember, one more was still to die, hadn't died yet. And of course, represent them as skulls. Now, what's weird is when you look at this, when you look at the teeth, what do you notice about the teeth? There's different numbers. Now, this dude only's got 2 teeth. What do you think that's suggesting? What do you lose as you get older? Teeth. You lose teeth. Oh. They're older. This one has the most teeth. He also has A17 on his coffin. What do you think that means? He was 17 years old. Y'all's age, your age in a year. It was a young kid, Sam Maverick, okay, who was out there. And then here you see sort of a zoom in, not very good of it. Now, what is this object here? It's an hourglass. What is that traditionally used to mean? Like what? He ran out of time, or his time was cut short by this guy. So here, it's one of these things, y'all, right? It's a little kind of thing that you use to keep track of time. His time ran out. And what is this other thing? The scythe, right? It's the Grim Reapers. So kind of cool, right? So you don't even have to be able to read to get the main idea here. Like, oh my gosh, it was a 17-year-old boy. His life cut short, and then some old dudes, okay, also killed. All right, so you get that, and then here's more about it. When the other guy died, there's his, I think. They went ahead and added that to it. Patrick Carr, and they mentioned he died tonight, and that kind of thing. Now, I visited the graves a few years ago, and of course, I knew Crispus Attucks, and then noticed Patrick Carr, because he died later. It's like, dude, you should have died when the rest of us did, but hey, we'll put you on here. Victims of the Boston Massacre, March 5th, 1770, were here interned by order of the town of Boston. And I go, okay. And then I kept reading, and I read this part. Here also lies buried the body of Christopher Snyder, aged 12 years old. And I'm like, how come I never heard of this kid? He's 12 years old, man. It's like an intermediate kid. Shot on George Washington's birthday, 1770, just 2 weeks before the Boston Massacre. So, of course, what did I have to do? Who the heck's Christopher Snyder? And so I looked him up on this cool invention. I believe it's going to be big someday. It's called the Internet. And on the Internet, or Wikipedia even, and what had happened, y'all, was they had been attacking, I think, some merchants or some officials' home, like they did, the Sons of Liberty. And this young kid decided to tag along, like, hey, all right, And so he tagged along. Well, the owner of the house decided, I'm going to stop these people. He came out with a rifle or gun, wasn't a rifle, but it was like a shotgun or musket. He fired one shot. Guess who was the lucky winner? Chris Snyder. And he died just 12 years old. So they went ahead and put him in there and said, this innocent first victim of the struggle between the colonist and crown, which resulted in independence. So anyway, y'all, I think that's just kind of interesting. This is where the marker is. I don't know those guys. This is a picture I got off the interwebs. But, here they are standing. And, you always want to go to the site of the massacre. But traffic is crazy, y'all. Bostonians drive like mad people. They have one hand on the steering wheel and the other to shoot obscene gestures at everybody. I mean, it's like honk, honk, and all that. They're absolutely wild. But my daughter and I were visiting, so we rushed out there. We stood on it, hopefully didn't get run over or anything, and then came back. And this is the actual spot. And it's been there, as you can see, a long, long time. That's the memorial to the victims of the Boston Massacre. So is it a little bit more complicated than y'all ever imagined? Yeah. I mean, is it just a simple story of, man, for some reason, just a bunch of colonists minding their own business, chilling, and British just for no reason just gun them down? It's much, much more complicated, as most things in history are, right? So I just kind of wanted to share that with y'all.